Girl faces giant snake to save shepherd dog, and what happens next is unbelievable. In the middle of the forest, she finds the animal being suffocated by the serpent. Without hesitation, she attacks the snake with her bare hands, ignoring fear and pain. But the outcome of this fight reveals something so profound that it forever changes the destiny of both. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll hear in your life. The morning dew still covered the leaves when Lily stepped barefoot onto the trail leading to the heart of the forest. At 12 years old, she already knew every curve, every loose stone, every tree that whispered secrets to the wind. While other children in the village of Pine Creek woke up to help with the cassava plantations or take care of domestic animals, she felt a different calling, something that pulled her away from the mud houses and the rituals that the elders insisted on keeping alive. The Appalachian forest that surrounded the small community was dense and mysterious. Adults always warned about the dangers that inhabited its depths: mountain lions, venomous snakes, treacherous rivers that could drag away even the most experienced fishermen. But for Lily, that green universe was a refuge. There, far from judging eyes and the expectations that weighed on her thin shoulders, she could truly be herself. Her mother, Catherine, had worked since dawn at the small village school, teaching children their first letters and basic numbers. Her father, Jack, had left 3 years before in search of work in the big cities of the South, promising to return as soon as he saved enough money to improve the family's life. Letters arrived sporadically, bringing vague news and a longing that hurt more than words could express. That's why Lily found in the forest not just an escape, but a constant companion. The birds recognized her and didn't fly away when she approached. The squirrels watched her with curiosity, as if they knew she was different from the other people in the village. Even the rare, precious blue butterflies landed on her outstretched arms, trusting this girl who walked in silence and respected the natural rhythm of all creatures. That September morning, when the heat had not yet become suffocating, Lily followed a trail she rarely explored. The path was narrower, covered with vines and low branches that required her to bend down to pass. The smell of damp earth mixed with the perfume of wildflowers created an almost magical atmosphere. It was as if nature itself was guiding her to some special place. That's when she saw him. Among the shadows cast by ancient trees, a figure slowly emerged. It was a dog, but not like the ones she knew in the village, those skinny mutts that fought over food scraps and slept under the stilt houses. This animal was different, larger, with dark fur mixed with golden tones covered in dried mud that stuck to his long hair. But it was the eyes that made her stop in the middle of the trail. Those eyes carried a story. They weren't the innocent eyes of a puppy or the hungry expression of an abandoned animal. There was a depth to them that bordered on human, a wisdom that spoke of experiences no dog should have lived through. Small scars marked his muzzle and ears, evidence of battles he had fought to survive. Lily and the dog stared at each other for long seconds. Neither moved. It was as if time had stopped in that small clearing in the forest, where only the distant sound of a stream broke the absolute silence. She knew she should feel afraid. Her mother had always warned her about wild dogs that could attack without warning. But what she felt was exactly the opposite. A strange feeling of completeness invaded her. It was as if, during all those years walking alone through the woods, she had been unconsciously looking for him. And now, finally, she had found him. The dog took a step forward, then another. His movements were cautious, but not aggressive. Lily slowly extended her hand, keeping her palm facing up, the way her grandfather Samuel had taught her when she was little. "Animals read our intentions through our scent and our posture," he used to say. "If you don't show fear or aggression, they won't either." When the dog came close enough to sniff her hand, Lily felt her heart quicken. The moist nose touched her skin delicately, as if he too understood the importance of that moment. Then, to her surprise, the animal sat down beside her and leaned his body against her leg, as if they were old companions who had reunited after a long separation. "Where did you come from?" she whispered, carefully caressing the dog's head. He responded with a low whimper, almost imperceptible, that sounded more like a sigh of relief than anything else. Lily looked around, searching for some sign that the animal might belong to someone. There was no collar, no tracks of other people on the trail. It was as if he had simply materialized there, as if the forest itself had created him especially for her. The sun was getting higher when she finally decided to return home. There were no doubts in her mind. The dog would come with her. When she stood up and began to walk, he followed her naturally, always staying by her side, as if he knew exactly what his place in the world was. The way back seemed shorter. Lily felt different, more complete, as if a part of herself that had always been missing had finally been found. She talked softly to the dog, telling him about the village, about her mother, about the secrets of the forest they could now share together. When they reached the edge of the woods, where the first houses of Pine Creek began to appear among the trees, Lily stopped. She knew that the moment of introducing her new companion to the community would be decisive. The villagers had their traditions, their superstitions, their particular ways of seeing the world. An unknown dog, appearing out of nowhere, would certainly generate comments. But as she looked into those deep, intelligent eyes, Lily knew that it didn't matter what others thought. That encounter had not been a coincidence. The forest had given her a gift, and she would not give it up. The village's reaction wasn't exactly what Lily expected, but it didn't completely surprise her either. When she appeared at the school where her mother worked, followed by the dark-furred dog, a murmur of curiosity and apprehension spread among the children playing in the small dirt courtyard. Catherine raised her eyes from the notebook she was correcting and felt her heart tighten. She knew her daughter well enough to know that this wasn't just an animal she had found in the forest. There was something in the way Lily walked beside the dog, in the way her eyes shone, that indicated a deeper connection. "Lily, what is this?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm as she approached. "He's my friend, Mum. He was lost in the woods and found me," answered the girl, stroking the head of the animal that remained alert but not aggressive. The other teachers at the school, Mrs. Rose and Mr. Manuel, approached cautiously. Having worked for decades educating local children, they had seen everything, from snakes entering classrooms to mountain lions prowling the village during the driest seasons. But this dog awakened a different feeling. "That animal is very large," commented Mrs. Rose, keeping her distance. "Where could he have come from? He doesn't look like the dogs from this region." Mr. Manuel, who besides being a teacher was also the village's informal animal caretaker, observed the dog with a professional eye. He noticed the scars, the developed musculature, the alert but not aggressive posture. "This one has seen too much to be a common mutt," he murmured. "Look at his build, the way he moves. Seems like a working dog." The news spread quickly through the houses of Pine Creek. By late afternoon, when Lily returned home with the dog by her side, there was already a small group of neighbors gathered in front of her faded blue wooden house. Mrs. Carman, the most respected midwife in the community, shook her head with disapproval. "Catherine, you can't let this girl bring any animal from the forest into the house," she said, crossing her arms over her generous chest. "This dog could have rabies, could be sick, and look at his size." "He's not sick," Lily defended, sitting on the ground next to the dog. "He's gentle, look." She extended her hand, and the animal touched his nose to her palm, causing murmurs of apprehension among the observers. Mr. Anthony, the oldest man in the village, spat on the ground and shook his head. "Girl, you don't understand these things. A dog that appears out of nowhere brings bad luck. Could be someone strange's animal, could be running from something. In my day, when an animal like this appeared, we knew we had to be careful." "What nonsense, Mr. Anthony," retorted Catherine, although her voice betrayed the concern she felt. "It's just an abandoned dog. Someone probably brought him from another region and he got lost." But suspicions continued to grow in the following days. The dog, which Lily had named Warrior because of his battle scars, demonstrated impressive intelligence. He seemed to understand not only basic commands, but also subtle gestures and even Lily's tone of voice. When she studied on the porch of the house, he would lie by her side motionless like a silent guardian. It was Mrs. Joan, the village's official gossip, who brought the most elaborate theories. "That dog isn't normal," she said during Sunday Mass, when the women gathered to talk after the ceremony. "Notice how he looks at people. It's like he's evaluating each one of us. And did you see how he reacted when those men from the electric company passed through here last week? He was growling softly, as if he knew them from somewhere." Mrs. Jones' observation wasn't wrong. Warrior had in fact reacted strangely to the presence of strangers in the village, not aggressively, but with a constant vigilance that suggested past experiences with dangerous situations. When unknown trucks or motorcycles arrived in Pine Creek, The dog immediately positioned himself between Lily and the newcomers, remaining tense until the situation was clarified. "Maybe he was trained for something," suggested Mr. Manuel during a conversation with Catherine. "I've seen police and rescue dogs. They have that behavior, that constant attention to the environment." The hypothesis gained strength when, 2 weeks after Warrior's arrival, an episode changed some people's perception of the animal. Little Mary, Mrs. Carmen's daughter, had wandered away from the group of children playing near the creek. She was only 4 years old, and curious like all children, decided to explore a trail that led to a more dangerous area of the forest. It was Warrior who first noticed the girl's absence. He was lying in the shade of a mango tree when suddenly he stood up, sniffed the air and began walking in circles, clearly agitated. Lily, who was reading a book borrowed from school, noticed the dog's strange behavior. "What is it, Warrior?" she asked, getting up to follow him. The dog ran to where the children were playing and began barking insistently, looking alternately at the group and at the trail where Mary had disappeared. It was then that Mrs. Carmen realized her daughter was no longer there. "Mary! Mary!" she shouted, with the desperation only a mother knows. Without hesitation, Warrior ran down the trail, followed closely by Lily and then by several adults. The dog seemed to know exactly the path the girl had taken, sniffing the ground and moving with determination through the dense vegetation. They found Mary about 15 minutes later, sitting on the ground crying, with her foot trapped between 2 rocks near a small stream. She was frightened but unharmed. Warrior reached her, and instead of barking or showing agitation, simply lay down beside her, offering comfort with his presence. "How did he know?" asked Mrs. Carmen, taking her daughter in her arms and looking at the dog with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. Lily couldn't answer, but she felt immense pride seeing how Warrior had helped. That episode should have completely changed the village's opinion about the dog, but the effect was more complex than she expected. While some people, like Mrs. Carmen, began to see Warrior in a different light, others became even more suspicious. "A dog that knows too much isn't normal," muttered Mr. Anthony. "How did he know where the girl was? How did he know that trail if he arrived here such a short time ago?" The unanswered questions fed the most elaborate theories. Some said Warrior might be a smuggler's dog who had gotten lost during a police operation in the area. Others suggested he belonged to some scientific expedition and had escaped from the researchers. There were even those who believed the animal possessed some kind of supernatural power, a special connection with the forest that allowed him to see and feel things that humans couldn't perceive. For Lily, however, none of this mattered. With each passing day, her connection with Warrior deepened. They developed a form of silent communication based on looks, subtle gestures, and a mutual understanding that transcended words. The dog seemed to intuit her feelings and needs, offering company when she felt lonely and protection when he perceived any real or imaginary threat. But the pressure from the community was growing, and Catherine found herself in a difficult position, trying to balance her daughter's well-being with the expectations and concerns of the neighbors with whom she would have to live for the rest of her life. It was on an October morning, when the heat was already beginning to become unbearable even in the early hours, that everything changed. Lily had woken up earlier than normal, disturbed by a strange dream where she saw Warrior running desperately through the forest, as if fleeing from something terrible. The dog, who normally slept on the floor beside her bed, had been restless since dawn, walking around the house and sniffing the air with an anxiety she had never seen before. "What is it, boy?" she asked, stroking his head. "Did you have nightmares too?" Warrior looked at her with those deep, intelligent eyes, then walked to the door and began to scratch the wood. It was his way of asking to go out, but there was an urgency in his movements that left Lily worried. Catherine had already left for school, leaving a note saying she would return later, and asking Lily not to wander too far from home. But Warrior's agitation was such that she decided to accompany him to the edge of the forest just to calm him down. The birds weren't singing. That was the first sign that something was wrong. Normally, the forest was a symphony of sounds: birds, squirrels, the sound of running water, the wind in the leaves. But that morning, a heavy silence hung over everything, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Warrior ran along the familiar trail, but instead of following the normal path, he veered off to a denser area where Lily rarely went. She followed him, stumbling over roots and scratching herself on thorns, trying to keep up with his accelerated pace. That's when she heard the sound. It was a low moan, almost inaudible, coming from somewhere ahead. Warrior stopped abruptly, every muscle in his body as tense as violin strings. His ears were erect, his nose pointed in the direction of the sound, and a low growl vibrated in his throat. Lily felt her heart race. She knew that wasn't the sound of any animal she knew. Not a bird, not a squirrel, not any of the creatures that inhabited that part of the forest. It was something different, something that spoke of pain and desperation. "Warrior, what is it?" she whispered, but the dog had already darted away. When Lily reached the spot, what she saw made her blood freeze in her veins. In a small clearing, where rays of sunlight managed to penetrate between the treetops, a terrifying scene was unfolding. A giant boa constrictor, more than 12 feet long, was slowly wrapping itself around another dog, smaller than Warrior, with light-colored fur desperately struggling to free itself from the snake's deadly coils. The animal was clearly losing the battle. Its movements were becoming increasingly weaker, its breathing more labored. The snake, with the millennial patience of its species, just tightened a little more with each escape attempt, knowing it would soon have its meal. Warrior didn't hesitate. With a fierce bark that echoed throughout the forest, he launched himself at the snake. But the boa was a formidable adversary. With a quick movement of its tail, it whipped Warrior and threw him against a tree trunk. The dog rolled on the ground, stunned but not defeated. Lily screamed and ran to help, picking up a thick branch she found on the ground. "Get out of there! Let him go!" she shouted, hitting the snake with all the strength she could muster. The serpent hissed and turned its head toward the girl, its small cold eyes gleaming with a primitive and dangerous intelligence. For a moment, Lily thought the snake might abandon its prey and come after her. But Warrior quickly recovered from the impact and returned to the attack. This time, instead of trying to bite the snake, which would be useless against its resistant hide, he began to pull the trapped dog, trying to undo the coils that were compressing it. The battle lasted several minutes that seemed like hours. Lily continued hitting the snake with the branch, shouting and making as much noise as possible, hoping it would scare the creature. Warrior bit and pulled, using all his weight and strength to try to save the other dog. It was when the snake whipped its tail once more, this time hitting Lily squarely in the arm, that everything changed. The girl was thrown far, hitting a rock and injuring her shoulder. Her screams of pain echoed through the forest, and seconds later, human voices responded to the sound. "Someone's screaming in the woods! Let's see what it is." The sound of people approaching made the boa hesitate. Snakes, as powerful as they are, prefer to avoid confrontations with humans. With a fluid movement, it released its prey and quickly slid into the dense vegetation, disappearing as if it had never been there. The dog that had been attacked fell to the ground, breathing with difficulty but still alive. Warrior ran to him and began to lick his wounds, as if trying to console him. It was evident that the two animals knew each other. There was a familiarity in their movements that suggested a previous encounter. When Mr. Manuel, Mrs. Rose, and two other people from the village arrived at the scene, they found a sight that left them speechless. Lily was sitting on the ground, bleeding from her shoulder, while Warrior attentively cared for another dog that was clearly injured but alive. "What happened here, girl?" asked Mr. Manuel, helping Lily to her feet. Between tears of pain and fright, she told them about the snake and how Warrior had risked his own life to save the other dog. Her narrative was interrupted by Mrs. Rose, who was examining the injured animal with a professional eye. "This one is a purebred dog," she said, surprised. "Look at the coat, the build. He's not a mutt like ours, and he has a collar, it's just a bit hidden under the fur." Carefully, she pushed back the fur on the dog's neck and revealed a dark leather collar with a small metal tag. The tag was scratched and dirty, but it was still possible to read some information. "Rex Rescue Team, contact Regional Emergency Command." The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. A rescue dog, lost in the forest, being saved by another dog of unknown origin. The pieces of a puzzle were beginning to fit together, but important elements were still missing to complete the picture. "We need to take both of them to the village and treat these wounds," said Mr. Manuel, carrying Rex in his arms. "And someone needs to notify the authorities about this rescue dog. People must be looking for him." On the way back, Lily observed how Warrior walked beside Rex, occasionally touching his nose to the other dog, as if checking on his condition. There was an obvious connection between them, a shared history that she didn't yet know. In the village, news of the snake attack and the heroic rescue spread quickly. For the first time since Warrior had arrived, people spoke of him with admiration instead of suspicion. "If it weren't for him, the other dog would be done for," commented Mrs. Carman. "What he did was very brave." But questions remained unanswered. Where did Rex come from? How had he ended up in that part of the forest? And most importantly, what was Warrior's true story? 2 days later, while Rex was recovering from his injuries under the care of Mr. Manuel, who had experience treating injured animals, a green jeep arrived at the village. 2 men stepped out wearing mud-stained uniforms and carrying communication equipment. When they saw Rex lying in the shade of Mr. Manuel's house, one of them exclaimed, "Rex, my God, we've been looking for you for months." And that's how the true story began to be revealed. The man who had spoken was tall and thin, with graying hair and tired eyes that spoke of many sleepless nights. When he knelt beside Rex and began to stroke him, his hands trembled slightly. "You gave us quite a scare, buddy," he murmured, and his voice carried an emotion that made all those present fall silent. His name was Carl, and he was the coordinator of the rescue team that had lost Rex during the devastating floods that hit the region 7 months earlier. With him was Mark, a veterinarian who was also part of the rescue operation. "We were working on evacuating an area that was completely flooded," explained Carl to the small crowd that had gathered around the jeep. "Rex was our most experienced search dog. He had located a family trapped in a house that was being carried away by the current. But when we tried to make the rescue, a wall collapsed and the water became very turbulent. When we managed to regroup, Rex had disappeared. We searched for days, weeks. We scoured miles of river, of forest, nothing. We thought he had—" Carl stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Lily heard everything with growing apprehension. If Rex had been found, it meant that soon the men would leave and take the dog with them. But what worried her more was a question forming in her mind that she hardly dared to ask. It was Catherine who had the courage to ask what everyone was thinking. "And did you lose any other dogs during that operation?" Carl and Mark exchanged a look laden with sadness. "Yes," Mark replied slowly. "We lost 2 dogs, Rex and Thor." The name echoed through the air like distant thunder. Lily felt her heart stop for a second and instinctively looked at Warrior, who was lying in the shade watching the whole scene with attention. When he heard the name Thor, the dog raised his ears and turned his head toward the men. "What was this Thor like?" asked Mr. Manuel, noticing the animal's reaction. "He was our bravest dog," said Carl, his voice choked. "Dark fur with golden spots, large build, training scars on his muzzle and ears. It was impossible not to recognize him. He saved dozens of people during his career. But that day—" Carl shook his head. "That day, the current was too strong. When the wall collapsed, both Thor and Rex were carried away by the water. We only managed to see Thor one last time, swimming desperately against the current, trying to reach a child who was drowning. After that, nothing more." A heavy silence settled over the group. All the villagers were now looking at Warrior, who remained motionless but clearly attentive to every word. Lily felt tears burning her eyes, but she didn't know if it was from sadness or from a joy impossible to contain. It was Mark who first moved. Slowly, as if approaching a wild animal, he walked toward Warrior. "Thor?" he called softly. "Is that you, boy?" The reaction was immediate and devastating. Warrior, Thor, jumped up and ran toward the veterinarian, leaping into his arms with a joy that made several villagers begin to cry. Mark fell sitting on the ground under the weight of the dog, laughing and crying at the same time, while Thor licked his face with an euphoria that spoke of months of longing. "It's him! It's Thor!" shouted Mark to Carl, who ran toward them and joined the group hug. "My God, how did you get here? How did you survive?" Lily watched the scene with a broken heart. It was impossible to deny the genuine joy of the reunion, the way Thor, she still couldn't call him by another name, reacted to the men who clearly knew and loved him. But at the same time, she felt as if she was losing the most important person in her life. Catherine approached her daughter and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Lily, you understand what this means, don't you?" The girl nodded, fighting to hold back tears. "He's going to leave with them." "Maybe," said her mother softly. "But look at what you did, daughter. You took care of him when he needed it most. You gave him a home, affection, a new family. and now look how happy he is to find his old companions again." Carl approached Lily, still with eyes red from emotion. "You're the girl who took care of Thor all these months?" Lily nodded, not trusting her voice. "I don't have words to thank you for what you did," he said, kneeling to be at her height. "Thor was always special, but after a tragedy like that, we didn't know if he would be able to recover. You not only kept him alive, you helped him heal." "He helped me too," Lily finally managed to say. "He was my best friend when I needed one the most." Carl smiled through his tears. "I can see that. Look how he looks at you." It was true. Thor had calmed down after the initial reunion and now moved between the rescue team men and Lily, as if he couldn't decide where he belonged. His eyes went from one to the others, expressing a confusion that exactly mirrored what Lily was feeling. "What's the protocol in these cases?" asked Catherine. "I mean, Thor is technically government property, isn't he?" Mark and Carl exchanged another look, this one more thoughtful. "Well," Mark said slowly, "officially, yes. Thor is a working dog trained with public resources. But—" He paused, observing how the dog was clearly divided between his two worlds. "There are also precedents for early retirement, especially after trauma, and Thor went through something very difficult." "What are you suggesting?" asked Mr. Manuel. Carl stood up and walked to where Thor was sitting between Lily and Rex. "I'm suggesting that maybe Thor has found exactly what he needed here. Look at him. He's at peace, healthy, clearly loved, and look at what he did. He saved Rex when we couldn't find him." "But he could go back to working with the rescue team," argued Mrs. Rose. "With all the experience he has." "He could," agreed Mark, "but the question is, does he want to? And more importantly, does he need to?" As if understanding they were talking about him, Thor stood up and walked to Lily. He sat beside her and rested his head on her leg, in the gesture that had become his trademark during the months they spent together. "I think he's already made his choice," said Carl softly. In the days that followed, a creative solution was found. Thor would be officially retired from the rescue team due to the trauma suffered during the flood operation, but would maintain his honorary status. This meant he could stay with Lily in Pine Creek, but occasionally help the team with local operations when necessary. Rex, completely recovered from his injuries, would return with the team, but would visit the village regularly. The connection between the two dogs had been restored, and it was evident they benefited from each other's company. More importantly, the story of Thor and his heroism during Rex's rescue completely changed the village's perception of him. Suspicions and fears were replaced by pride and admiration. Even Mr. Anthony, the most skeptical of all, admitted that dog there has a bigger heart than many Christians I know. 6 months later, when the rains returned and the river began to rise dangerously, it was Thor who first detected the signs of a possible flood. His constant agitation and persistent barking alerted the village early enough for preventive measures to be taken. "It's like he's our own personal early warning system," joked Catherine during a community meeting. But for Lily, Thor continued to be much more than that. He was her companion, her protector, her best friend. Together, they continued exploring the forest, but now with an additional purpose. Thor had begun teaching Lily to recognize danger signs in the woods, how to identify injured animals, and how to react in emergency situations. The girl who once felt out of place in her own community now had not only a special place but also a mission. She and Thor became Pine Creek's unofficial safety duo, always alert for any sign of trouble. And when people asked how she had known that warrior, Thor, was special from the first moment, Lily smiled and looked at her furry companion. "Some connections," she would say, "are simply destined to happen." The forest knew we needed each other. On quiet nights when mother and daughter sat on the porch of the faded blue house, watching Thor sleep peacefully at Lily's feet, Catherine sometimes wondered about life's mysteries. How had a lost dog and a lonely girl found each other exactly when they needed each other most? How had that encounter transformed not only their lives, but the entire dynamics of a small Appalachian village? Perhaps there would never be answers to these questions. But one thing was certain. In Pine Creek, people learned that sometimes the greatest heroes arrive in unexpected ways, with paws instead of boots, and hearts big enough to save not only lives but entire communities. And every time a child from the village got lost in the woods and was found safe and sound, thanks to Thor's sharp instincts and Lily's brave determination, the residents remembered that true strength doesn't come from size or fame, but from the willingness to love, protect, and never give up on those who need help. Give up. The end. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Lily and Thor has touched your hearts as it touched ours. A story about encounters that change destinies, about courage that comes from the most unexpected places, and about how true love can transform not just two lives, but an entire community. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories that explore the extraordinary bonds between people and animals. You can find it by clicking here. If this story of friendship and heroism touched you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like. It helps us a lot to continue bringing these narratives that celebrate life's most beautiful moments. Every day, we share unique stories that remind us of the magic that exists in unexpected encounters and the strength of the bonds we create. Don't miss our upcoming content and tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced an encounter that completely changed your life? We're eager to read your stories.